Hey guys, what's up and welcome back. And of course, if you're new here, thank you and welcome. So recently I was bored at home and doing some organizing, and I was going through a lot of my makeup and I realized, holy cow, I have a lot of eyeshadow palettes, and I counted 30 eyeshadow palettes. That's not counting my singular eyeshadow pots. And it didn't even dawn on me that wow, I have quite the collection going so far. So I thought today would be a fun time to film a video on all of the eyeshadow palettes that I currently have. And I think what I like so much about the collection I have going on so far is that there is a really good mix of drugstore eyeshadow palettes to high-end eyeshadow palettes. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and start this video in no particular order. I'm just gonna go ahead and go off of groups that I already have kind of going on my desk already. And like I said, there are 30 palettes that I'm going to be showing you guys from my collection. So if this video tends to be a little bit longer, grab a snack, grab a drink, you know the drill. Let's go ahead and get started. Starting off, we have the Huda Beauty Ruby Obsessions palette. This retails for $27, and this is a 9-pan palette. You have 4 mattes and 5 shimmer and metallic shades in here. And I love this palette so much because you have a mix of lighter and deeper shades for endless combinations. Secondly, we have another Huda Beauty palette. This is the Emerald Obsessions palette. Again, similar to the Ruby Obsessions palette, this retails for $27. This is another 9-pan palette. You have 3 mattes and 6 shimmer metallic shades. And I love this because you have a great contrast of bright greens and earthy greens. Next, we have the Tarte BU Naturally palette, and I don't believe this is sold on Tarte.com anymore, but what I could find online, this can retail from $26 to $28. The shades themselves smell like chocolate. It is not edible though, don't let that fool you. This is such a simple, barely there eyeshadow palette, great for everyday looks. And it's so cute and compact, so you can just put it in your purse to be on the go. Next up, we have the Colourpop Miss Bliss palette, and this palette is from their Cloud Dye collection, and this retails for $12. This is a two-tone palette that consists of pinks and corals. Between the 6 matte shades, 2 metallic shades, and 1 pressed glitter, this palette can be used for everyday looks, or you can get really cutesy and colorful with it, especially with this pressed glitter. And going on, we have another palette from the Cloud Dye collection. This is the Colourpop Aura and Out palette. Again, this retails for $12. And I like this palette because you have a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green, and some beautiful minty blue hues. Out of the entire Cloud Dye collection, I think this formula is the dustiest out of them all, but the colors truly build up beautifully, so just be aware that there is quite a bit of fallout, but these colors are seriously so beautiful. The last and third palette from the Cloud Dye collection, we have the Colourpop in a Trance palette. Again, this retails for $12. You have 9 shades of pinks, blues, and purples, and I love this because of course you have to have that pressed glitter shade, and then that top shade, Clarity, that is such a beautiful pearlescent shade. And going into another one of my favorite palettes in my entire collection, this is the PUR collaboration with RAWBEAUTYKRISTI, and this retailed for $34. But I love this palette because it has double-sided packaging. You have 9 shades on each side, totaling 18 shades in the entire palette. You have a more neutral side for everyday looks, but you still have a little bit of pop of color in there. And then there is the colorful side to channel your inner artistry. But again, even though these are very bold colors, these are very, very wearable. Next up, we have the Juvias Plays Nubian Coral 3 palette. This retails for $20. This is a 12-pan palette with amazing range. You have a mix of peachy coral tones, but again, bringing in these browns and grays to accent any look. You can get so many looks out of just one palette. There are 6 matte shades in here as well as 6 metallic shades, so it's a really good half and half palette. And then we have this PUR Festival 2.0 palette. This retails for $36. You have 12 pressed pigments in here. It's a little bit of a mix of bold, bright, and neutral. And because these are pressed pigments, the shades are insanely pigmented, and with that being said, you have minimal fallout from here. You have 5 matte shades and 7 metallic shimmery shades. The colors themselves truly look like a festival, and this is such a fun and colorful palette. Moving on, we have the BH Cosmetics Summer in St.Tropez palette. This retails for $17, so it's a pretty affordable palette considering you do have 16 shades in here. But even looking at these shades, this is truly paradise in a palette. This has such an amazing formula. It is easy to blend and build up. It's definitely one of my favorite palettes. Next up, we have another favorite palette of mine. This is the Colourpop Butterfly Effect palette, and this retails for $40. And what's so great about this palette is you have a mix of warm and cool tone neutrals. And there is so much variety in this palette as far as textures go. You have mattes, pressed glitters, micro glitters. You even have some super shock shades in here. This is actually the palette I take whenever I travel because it's such an essential and you can get any look you want out of this palette. And this next palette here is a palette that I actually built myself on the Colourpop website. They do have a build your own palette option. You have the option of getting 24 shadows in your palette for $45. When I was creating this palette, I really wanted a mix of brights, warms, and copper naturals. So in this palette, I do have some matte shades, some super shocks, and pressed glitters. I have such an attachment to this palette since I did create it myself, so I really do need to start reaching for it more than I do. This next palette is the Natasha Denona Peak palette, and I got this in a BoxyCharm box. If I remember correctly, this was a BoxyCharm exclusive, and this does retail for $48. This is a miniature 5-pan palette. It's so great and compact to just throw in your everyday makeup bag. You have 4 matte shades and 1 metallic shade for a pop of glam whenever you want to. Up next, we have the Laura Mercier Hidden Gems palette, which retails for $55. The packaging is so luxe and so pretty. You have 12 gorgeous shades that range from light neutral to dark and sultry. And this palette was inspired by precious jewels, and all the shades are so pigmented and so stunning. And I am very impressed with these shades because they are very long lasting and they rarely crease. This next palette is from Ciate London. It is called the Velvet palette. It does retail for $30. And as pretty as this is, I am unfortunately going to have to declutter this palette. The shades just don't speak to me, and honestly, I'm not thrilled about the formula. The shades just crumble simply by just swatching them, and there are just too many similar shades in this one palette. There's essentially some duplicates within the palette. Up next, we have the Violet Voss Essentials Pro Series palette. This retails for $36. You have 10 shades in here, and it's a perfect mix of warm and cool tones, and it's a good mix of mattes and shimmer shades as well. I like this palette because I feel like with this color combination, you can create a monochromatic look, or you can do a duo colored look if you wanted as well. And this next palette is pretty new to me. I actually have not even touched this yet. This is the Shared Planet Tiger collection, and it does retail for $48. And as you can see, it has 12 gorgeous shades in here, and these shades were inspired by the tiger and its habitat that it lives in. But in all honesty, I am excited to try this entire palette because all of these shades are pretty in their own way. Next up, we have this palette from I Heart Revolution. This is their Tasty Peach palette, and it retails for $15, so it is a pretty affordable eyeshadow palette. This is an 18-pan palette with highly pigmented mattes and metallics. And I love this color story so much. It's so adorable. Even the names are so cutesy. There's a beautiful mix of pinks, peaches, and pops of purples to really make this a versatile palette, and the packaging is so adorable. Next up, we have the Hello Charmer palette. This is a BoxyCharm exclusive. This does retail for $39. And within this palette, you have 5 matte shades and 7 metallic shimmery shades. And I don't actually reach for this palette often. It doesn't really call to me. Honestly, with that being said, if I don't use this palette within the next 2 to 3 months, I'm definitely just gonna declutter it because I feel like I just don't want to waste space. I don't hate it, but I don't love it, if that makes sense. And next up, we have the e.l.f. Retro Paradise palette. This retails for $14. This is an 18-piece eyeshadow palette that was inspired by the Bahamas. The color story is so vibrant and so up my alley, but I have to say I do have a love-hate relationship with this palette. Some of the shades perform so well, while others just lack pigment. All around, this is a very fun palette. You do just have to work with it a little bit. I don't want to hate on it too much because I do really like it. It's just not my favorite palette in my collection. Up next, we have the Colourpop Dreamery Super Shock collection, which retails for $38. I know this isn't exactly an eyeshadow palette per se, but I keep all these individual shades in this packaging, so it acts like a palette to me. I am missing one shade though because they sent me a duplicate of the shade Dreamery instead of the shade DGAF. If you have not used Super Shock shades from Colourpop before, you're missing out. The formula is truly unreal and out of this world. These shades do have a beautiful duochrome flex to them, and they can be used as your one and done shades or to top off any eyeshadow look. This is truly a collection to have if you don't have it already. Okay, and up next we have the Ciate London The Editor palette, which retails for $32. First off, how cute is this packaging? This is an 18-piece palette with the perfect blend of blendable matte shades and pigmented metallics. And I love this palette because of the beautiful berry tones and the jewel-toned accents. Such wearable shades, honestly, for any season: winter, fall, summer, spring. And this is the Huda Beauty Desert Dusk palette, and it does retail for $65. There are 18 highly pigmented shades with 4 different textures in this this palette. You have 1 glitter shade, 8 mattes, you have 6 shimmers, and 3 duochromes. So definitely a variety of textures in here. But with that being said, I do tend to reach for this palette a lot. Such a good palette. Up next, I do talk about this palette a lot on my channel. It's definitely probably my favorite eyeshadow palette. This is the infamous Natasha Denona Glam palette, which does retail for $65. It's a 15 pan palette with a combo of cool tones and neutral shades. It is rare that you find a cool tone neutral palette. So of course when I saw this, I had to pick it up, and I've been using it almost every day since. This next palette is from Acebutte. I never know if I'm pronouncing their name right or not, but this is the Vintage Dawn palette, which retails for $34.99. And in this palette, you have 12 shades that were inspired by the sunrise. And this is a sister palette to the Scarlet Dusk palette. Unfortunately, I do not have the Scarlet Dusk palette, so the Vintage Dawn palette is gonna just have to do for now. And this is probably the most pigmented palette that I own. The pigment is seriously no joke. The color story is beautiful, and I need to reach for this palette more than I do. It's so stunning. Up next, we have a palette from Artist Couture. This is the Caliente palette, which retails for $30. The packaging itself is pretty fun and pretty sleek. This is an 8 pan palette with 5 mattes, 2 metallics, and 1 pearlescent shade. And I thought I was really gonna love this palette because I love these shades, but the matte shades have so much fallout and they tend to be a little bit patchy when you apply them. I don't want to hate on this palette, but honestly, the metallic shades save this palette for me, and that's honestly the only reason I keep it around. Sorry, Artist Couture, I'm not trying to send hate. I just want to be honest, but I do really like the metallic shades in this palette. And up next, we have a really fun palette. This is the Hank & Henry Living in Color palette, which retails for $25. And there are 9 shades in here, and it's a very playful palette. And it's playful in terms of color, but it's also meant to use your fingers with. And in this palette, you have 4 matte shades, 1 pressed pearl metallic, and 4 of their new formula, which they call finger foils. So that's why I say you typically should use this palette with your finger. And in my own opinion, I typically do apply metallic shades with my finger anyways, but this palette is just so playful. The packaging in itself is a little chunky, I will say. I feel like I would reach for it more if it was a little bit sleeker in packaging. I feel like this ends up usually in the back of my drawer somewhere. So I do like this palette, but the packaging just isn't my favorite. And up next, we have a palette from SheGlam. SheGlam is the makeup line from Shein, and this is the Artistry palette, which retailed for $9. Yes, $9, you heard me correctly. And this palette consists of these beautiful warm neutrals, and with being $9, this palette surprised me to no end because I wasn't sure how the quality was gonna be for the price, but I actually pick up this palette often, and it's so wearable and pretty. And I do like this entire color story as well as the entire palette because you do have a mix of mattes, shimmers, pearls, pressed glitters. It's an all-around great palette to have in your drawer. This next palette is the Esmeralda palette by Beauty Creations, and it does retail for $13.99. And I've actually only swatched these. I haven't really played around with this palette much, and I immediately think of fall weather when I see this color story. But even some of these berry tones, I feel like I can do a really nice winter look with this. So who knows, I might start picking this up and playing with it because I don't want to waste it. They have beautiful colors in here. And this next palette is the Robin Hood palette from the Fairy Tales line from Storybook Cosmetics, and it does retail for $14. There are 6 shades in this palette, and with those 6 shades, you have golds, browns, and greens in here, which straight up screams Robin Hood. And I do like these shades for all seasons, but again, like the Hank & Henry palette, I feel like I can't really reach for this palette that often because the packaging is unnecessarily bulky. I might actually depot these shades into a magnetic palette because the shades are so stunning and so pigmented that I don't want to waste this palette or let it expire. And last but not least, we have a pretty random palette to talk about. This is the Smashbox and Vlada palette. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. This does retail for $29. I actually think I got this as a stocking stuffer one year for Christmas. This is an 8 pan eyeshadow palette, and it's so tiny and cute and compact. I love this because it looks like an OG eyeshadow palette. You have a mix of rose golds, coppers, and brown neutrals in here. So I do feel like this palette can be really versatile in skin tones as well as eye looks that you create with it. And I should actually put this in my makeup bag because I actually really love these shades. It's so tiny, I feel like it got shoved back somewhere and I kind of just forgot about it. Okay guys, if you made it this far, thank you for sticking through the entire video. You are so appreciated. Those were all of my 30 eyeshadow palettes that make up my entire eyeshadow palette collection. Let me know if you guys want to see more of these. Do you want to see my lipstick collection? Do you want to see any of my other collections? Let me know if you like these videos. This is my first time doing one of these, so feedback is always welcomed. If you guys like this video, go ahead and give it a big old thumbs up, and if you want to see more, go ahead and subscribe below. It's right down there. And as always guys, I'll see you next time.